Hello, guys. Welcome back to the We Have Issues podcast. I am Matt.
I'm Chris.
Today we have a very special episode for you. We have Duane Loynes Jr., the American Solidarity Party candidate for governor of California. And so, Duane, nice to have you on. You're a young guy. We need tons of that good spirited youth coming back into politics. Need to get the old guys out of there. So we're certainly glad, we're certainly excited to have you running. And you also are relatively new to the party. So Duane, why don't you tell us how you came to be in the party and how you so quickly turned around to run for governor of California?
Sure thing. Well, once again, thank you for having me here. I'm Duane Loynes Jr. I graduated from Loyola Marymount University last May. I was a screenwriting major. I was a member of the film college, and I minored in Asian studies. And it was I actually found out about the American Solidarity Party right before my junior year. It was actually because I was going down a bit of a Wikipedia rabbit hole. When you were on Wikipedia, you just go from one article to another. And somehow, I don't know why, I really don't, but I ended up on G.K. Chesterton's page for some reason. And I was just reading about I read through his biography on there, whatever it was saying. And somewhere along there, the word distributism came up. And I thought, what is that? I've never heard of it, but it came up a few times, so I was just curious, and I wanted to learn more. And so I clicked on that, and that was my next step down the rabbit hole, and read about distributism, got sort of a general, non-detailed crash course, whatever you can expect from Wikipedia. And I read through that. And then there was some place that said, here's a list of parties in the United States that champion these values, or at least values related to it. And American Solidarity Party was one of the parties listed there. So I clicked on that link and I read through that. And I was surprised, one, that I've never heard of this party before, because I felt like it somehow read my mind and articulated a lot of my, personal beliefs that I had never seen in a party, or at least in an American party before. So I was happy about that. And two, I was surprised about the fact that it was center right on social issues and then sort of center left on economic issues. And I didn't really know that dated combination existed in any, once again, American party. So I showed it to my parents. They were surprised as well. They were happy to see that I was passionate about a political party, because that wasn't really like me to feel that way about any political entity at all, at least at that point. And so that was 2023. And in 2024, during Peter Sansu's campaign, he came to Southern California to speak to members of the party who lived in at least the general area, and some people drove a long distance. And that's when I got connected with the California chapter and, got some phone numbers and emails, got to know some key people who help out in this area of the country. And in August of last year, August of 2025, I went to one of the meetups they had in SoCal. And that's when I was approached about the idea of possibly running for something. I don't know if the word governor was actually brought up at that point yet. That might have come later. But that was how the idea of me even running came about in the first place. So, yeah.
That's certainly impressive. I know that's a tall order to drop on somebody as soon as they get to the party, but that's how it happened with all of us. Yes. I mean, I joined and instantly was invited to run as delegate for the convention, and then got on national committee. And, it's kind of funny, and I joke about it, but that's actually, to me, that's a sign of a healthy party when they are trying to bring in new talent and they're open to new members, getting involved. You don't, we're in a stagnant stagnant state with the two-party system. So definitely glad to have you on board. I know Chris is relatively new. Chris, I think you might be newer to the party than I am.
I believe I just am. I think. Well, I mean, I'd been following the Solidarity Party for a few years before I officially made the plunge in. But I believe I might be coming up on a year now.
Okay.
Being in the party officially myself.
Right.
And I know there's a lot of people like me that are, kind of interested in the Solidarity Party, but are kind of on the fence. My advice to those people are, come on in. The water's fine. Like, it's a healthy environment. Obviously, the policies are what you believe in. So absolutely. And you can help people like Duane run for office, Yeah. So that I would encourage people for that.
Well, it's like I said, it's certainly admirable, and there's obviously a reason that you accepted that responsibility, Duane. So what are some issues in California that you see that kind of inspired you to run for governor?
Well, around the time I was getting acclimated with the California chapter of the ASP, because similar to kind of what Chris said, I was following sort of the national party online and through in that way. But the people were recovering from the wildfires around the time that I was talking to California members, and sort of the resistance and resilience that tragedy sort of put California on the map in a sort of tragic way. That was going on around the time I was thinking about, possibly running. People were still recovering from that, people I knew personally. And that was one of the motivators, I think, in getting me to run. And so that's definitely, I think, one of the major issues going on in California right now. That's definitely been talked about for a long time. People have been talking about, fires in California. That's not a new thing. But 2025 was a year that, for obvious reasons, because of the LA fires, people are talking about that a lot more. So that's one. The budget, I think, is another one. California is big. We have a really big economy, but our economy is big, but our problems are also very expensive. So we have trouble paying for things. So I think that's another issue that we're having. We're doing a better job than I think we used to in some ways of cutting waste, but the administration, things are still bloated. So budget problems, that's another one. But housing, that's the big one. Housing and how that's related to homelessness as well. I mean, those two things are connected. So that's, I think, one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest issue plaguing California at the moment. Like I said earlier, I graduated from Loyola Marymount University. And often when I was going from campus to the grocery store, it was close enough where I could walk. But a lot of times I would pass through a homeless encampment, tents that were on the way to, literally on the path between my dorm, or the campus in general, and where I was about to go and get food. And so that was a visual reminder of sort of how I was blessed in ways that many other people, unfortunately, are not. So that was one of the ways that I think just how big of an issue that was imprinted on me, because of the fact that, I saw that at least weekly when I was going to get food. So yeah, I'd say those were kind of the three of the biggest ones: the fires, budgeting, homelessness. There are others, but those are the three that come to mind, at least initially.
Right. Yeah. I can relate to the homeless issue. I'm from Louisiana, and we saw our fair share of that. I'm from Shreveport, so definitely can relate. And that does, housing and economy kind of go hand in hand. So in my opinion, I know California is seeing certain industries leave. They're going to more favorable climates like Texas, but if you are going to bring back industry, you have to have workers. If you have workers, you have to have a place to put workers. Do you have a plan to tackle the affordability of housing?
Businesses in California have explicitly stated that housing supply and things like that are hurting them because businesses are struggling to remain here because workers can't afford to live here. And so they've explicitly said that. So, it's not a mystery. So I'm glad you brought that up. There are a few things that I think can help with that. Housing approvals, I think, need to be sped up. There needs to be redevelopment of land that is being underused. You can see that sometimes with driving. I mean, you might pass by a place and, even if you're not a particularly politically minded person and you're not really thinking in detail about, how can land best be used by the administration, you might pass by a place and think, I wonder what that space is for. And the answer might be, nothing, unfortunately. So redevelopment of underused land. I think it needs to be cheaper for families and workers to live near the jobs, where the jobs are currently hiring people, just because commute is a big deal for whether people are going to be able to live in whatever place in California they want to live. So I think that's one. Speculation also often drives up housing. Businesses have a huge profit motive for a lot of things they do. But corporate hoarding hurts single-family homes from families being able to afford single-family homes.
Certainly.
And not a lot of them are in the budget for a lot of first-time buyers in the first place. So, yeah.
And that's something we'll stop right there and kind of build on that. So you posted to our voting members section on Facebook a 5-point kind of plan for addressing housing. And what you just talked about, the basically corporate hoarding, the private equity coming in, buying up everything. So the third point you had is tax policy should reduce the hoarding of single family homes by corporations in order to discourage holding multiple properties and keeping homes off the market. Escalating taxes should be placed on each additional home. For individuals, additional homes that are owned and not sold should be taxed. Higher taxes are triggered above a threshold, example, after 5 homes. And this is something I don't think people want to admit this because a lot of people have made their fortune in real estate. There's a lot of passive income thanks to real estate. And so I completely get it, but I just want to give this example really fast. So right after COVID, we moved back to Louisiana so we could be near family, and we bought this 2-bedroom, 1-bath kind of cottage bungalow type home, and our payment on it was $570. Even then, that was nuts. I wish we hadn't gotten rid of the house. I wish I had become a slumlord and kept it. But $570 a month, that was absolutely crazy, and we could afford that easily. And a friend of mine who buys up properties for investment properties, she said, oh, yeah, I remember that house. We looked at that house. We were going to buy it. And I said, just out of curiosity, what would you have rented that house for? And she said, $1,000, maybe $1,200. And I'm like, think about that. $570 jumping up to $1,200. At $570, the single mother can afford that. The person on disability can afford that. The college student can afford that. You jump that up to $1,200, you have priced all of those people out of the market. And so that's just something I want people to be aware of. Is I understand the want for that asset to be in your portfolio, but that's what happens when you commoditize housing like that. Something else that I really liked about this, you were talking about zoning laws and tax laws should favor the construction of single-family homes and encourage owners of unused or underused property, such as vacant parking lots, to sell so the land can be redeveloped into housing. I like that point because within the ASP, we kind of partner up with Strong Towns. Strong Towns is amazing, excellent.
Love their work.
Yeah, exactly. They do really good work. Here in Northwest Arkansas, we have Groundworks, kind of the same, similar idea. But if I have a criticism, it's that their answer is multifamily, quadplex, duplex, triplex. That sort of is their remedy for all of this. And so I like that you focused on single family housing because, as we were talking about before the interview, you're concerned about social issues. Nothing wrong with multifamily housing. It does invite kind of the corporate atmosphere, and I don't think it is conducive to that tight-knit, Americanized community that you were talking about that you want to cultivate. So why don't you tell us about kind of your ideal vision for how family and community plays into a state?
Sure. And so one of the things about single family, multifamily housing and what you just asked about in terms of how this plays into sort of the American community and how housing and what type of housing you build plays into that. I think that single family housing, even though I believe that the construction of single family housing should be favored, I am personally not as opposed to sort of multifamily housing as, some other people who talk about this sort of issue might be. And only because of the belief that different solutions are beneficial in different places, depending on where you are in the country, where you are in the state. Obviously, almost all of what I'm going to talk about is about California, at least for where I am. But in terms of the American community and what single family housing has done for it, I think that even though having single families have a sort of first time buyer advantage if they're going to purchase a home for the first time, that can be very helpful for the young father, young mother, or single father, single mother, and that can help them a lot in that case. But one issue, one sort of, danger of this is that it can isolate people even further from the larger community. So when single family homes are encouraged, when that policy is pursued to use underused property to the best of its ability, I think there needs to be an intentional motive, an intentional plan to make sure that this does not isolate them from their extended family even further. Because that is a danger, I think, with the sort of American nuclear family setup. And I don't personally believe that the single family home has to be a sort of a danger to that as it has been in the past. So that's something I like to bring up whenever I'm talking about, whenever I'm speaking positively about single family housing, only because I know that's a danger that people who might be afraid of that might bring up.
It sounds like you kind of like have my mindset on it. You want to make an economy, make opportunities so that younger people don't have to leave their family and don't have to separate so much. Is that kind
right.
of what?
And I think and this has a lot to do with the conversation of the not my backyard, that sort of conversation. And that comes a lot in strong towns. I'm very sympathetic to their plight on that. But I think that's one thing that I guess separates me from a lot of people that might champion construction of single family homes, is that I'm not opposed to the alternative building plan in places where that might be beneficial, but for single family homes, which I'm still in favor of the construction of in places where that's, I think, should be the priority, there needs to be a plan to make sure that the fence, sometimes literal, sometimes metaphorical fence that's around the nuclear family does not separate people from, the outside their extended family. Right. A lot of people often talk about if they're going to see their extended family, they're going to have to drive a long distance or hop on a plane. That's fine for a lot of people, but sometimes it's because they're priced out of where they would want to be closer.
Something that I would like to see you tackle and address, and this is not quite as controversial as it once was, but I know at one time it was a big deal in California, is ADUs. And in your 5 points, you mentioned zoning, and that's something like you were saying, you have extended family. If you had the ability to easily, quickly, without all the red tape, put those ADUs on your property, extended family could stay with you. It could be a source of income for younger people who otherwise might not be able to afford that home themselves.
You brought up NIMBYs and you brought up rental properties and things like that, and expanding the inventory of homes in the area. Obviously, when you increase the supply of a thing, then the costs go down, which is beneficial to new buyers. But I'm now speaking for the concerns of the people who already own homes, because those people will be instrumental in electing you. So if I am an already existing homeowner and I'm concerned about the loss in value of my house for these projects to increase housing, what would be your response to my concerns? because that's my retirement, right? Especially in California, where, I could have bought my house in the 80s and, I'm reaching retirement age. I might want to downgrade into a nice condo, but, I could easily be, get $1 million, $2 million in the bank with some of these houses that I paid, $80,000, $100,000 for back in the day. Dropping the value of my home will affect my retirement. So what would you say to those people?
Well, I think that also ports to a larger issue that we were previously discussing about families' role in all this. The way you described that, I'm imagining, you talked about retirement, so I'm imagining an older person. A lot of people at that age don't feel like they can rely on the sort of younger members of their family who are just starting families to back them up, to support them as they go into the retirement years, as they age and become elderly, or even further along that path. And so that does give them a sort of concern for, hey, what about me? I was planning to, sell this, make some money, go and live on my own, and do kind of my own thing. And I think you said the word even condo. Maybe I was planning on purchasing one. I think it's really unfortunate that a lot of people feel put in the position to have to make it on their own in the first place when it comes to what they're going to do when they reach that age, because their children, their grandchildren might live far away from them because of the whole pricing issue that we talked about in the first place. And so that creates the mindset of, what about mine, when it comes to retirement and what they're going to do with the value of their home. Ideally, they would be able to find themselves having a stake in the younger family's plight, because not only is that going to aid the younger family, it's going to help them as well, because they're going to be supported by their younger sort of their other family members who are going to benefit from this in the first place. So a lot of older folks are removed from the situation that would make this beneficial to them in the first place, and they see themselves in a sort of separate category.
Do you see a possible solution for that being, we're going to expand the amount of housing for new families in the same area, so now we're looking at a situation where there are more households and more properties in a given area, so that maybe the cost of the lost value in the home value can be made up for in a lowered tax burden, perhaps, like a lowered property tax burden. Basically, like, the way I see it is if we're lowering property values, you got to make it up to them in some other way. That's through improved services, because more people require more services, so it'll be more easier to get them, right? You're going to need more clinics, so your wait times for clinics go down. You're going to need more parks, so you'll have parks closer to you. You won't have to travel as far. More people in an area also leads to better mass transit systems, so which could be beneficial. Do you think the benefits of additional housing and all that brings outweighs any potential loss of home value for these people?
I think it does. And housing, it can sometimes be turned into a kind of moral versus economic issue. But I do think the value of drawing more people in and having all these services, I think that adds to the economic boom that an area can have. And I do think that with these services in place, like, parks, public transit, things like that, that actually helps to make an area more economically viable for the people who have an economic stake in it, not just the people who want to live there. And a lot of people don't want to move to a place where they feel like where they're going to have a lack of access to care or transit, or, a place where their, children can play safely. And so having all that in the first place will attract more people, and it'll make your area be a more attractive place for people.
Well, and the fact that Duane, you've prioritized single family housing over this, but you also recognize in certain situations, multifamily housing, is a priority in this area. So obviously in your mind, you already understand there's going to have to be impact studies done for these projects and for these developments. And like you're saying, Chris, if it comes back that you do kind of one of these mixed use facilities, I know here in Northwest Arkansas, we're starting to see a lot of apartment complexes built on top of like shopping chains with restaurants, pretty much a self-contained community. You could essentially live there and work there and not even have to have a car and never even have to leave the actual property if you can afford to live in that apartment. That's an issue that we're seeing, is that the service sector can't even afford to live in the apartments on top of where they work. So that's one of Carvel's unfortunately not here with us. I think he's teaching a Bible study, but one question he had for you, Duane, is do you support rent control? Why or why not?
It sometimes gets a bit hard to explain, but I'd say yes, in some form. I think it should be limited, so not the end all be all. But when families are at risk of displacement, I support sort of a limited stabilization of rent. But I don't think it should be the whole housing strategy. The main heavy hitters of this will be building more housing, reducing companies' abilities to see this solely as a source for profit, even though that's obviously just a part of how they'll have to operate, and creating a path to ownership. So I won't discount it entirely. I just don't think it's the main weapon in the arsenal, maybe like some people would say.
I 100% agree with that. We've seen time and time again that full-blown rent control ends in disaster, but I think there is a happy medium. There is a hybridization that can be done of certain programs.
And that's very on brand for us.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true.
You talked about balancing the budget earlier. Where do you see the biggest opportunities to balance the budget? What programs do you think might be a bit bloated that need cut back? Or, what revenue streams do you think that the state needs to reach into to offset the budget deficit? Basically, how would you balance the budget if you were governor?
There has been motion in that direction, thankfully, so I wouldn't feel like I'm beginning a process that, or starting something from scratch. There have been a lot of vacant state government positions that they've been trying to get rid of to achieve certain savings. I think they reduced costs by something like $360 million just by getting rid of government positions that were vacant. And so they've been going in the direction of eliminating this in the first place. And in just a few years, they can get into the billions of how much you save when you get rid of those. California also has a lack of oversight in some ways when it comes to how they're spending on fighting the homelessness problem. So not a lot is done to accurately sort of assess the effectiveness of its programs for homelessness. And so it's not necessarily I don't want to come across as someone who's saying, end homelessness programs, because obviously that's not what we want. But there needs to be more reporting and better tracking on these programs. And if they can't show results, there needs to be an accountability for that. It's not just a California issue. I mean, it's plenty of places in America has, like most famously the Pentagon. Yeah. But
honestly, I feel like America has enough money to afford, free healthcare, free college, free like all of these welfare programs, not by raising taxes, but just by cutting down on government waste. If you were made governor, you would like to sort of set up a government auditing agency, right? Kind of, I hesitate to say like Doge, but like.
And I think and Doge had a pretty huge ask from Musk on what he wants to accomplish with that. But a lot of in keeping with the ASP principles, a lot of it is about pushing power downwards. So I would love it if LA County is properly accountable to itself when it comes to what it's spending on. Not everything has to be state level in terms of auditing and all those programs. Pushing power downward when possible, I still think is the the best sort of angle to go with for these things. Cities, councils, local communities, all these institutions can, they have their own ability to handle these things. I don't think Sacramento has to micromanage everybody's business when it comes to this, even though, as a state, this needs to be something we start doing.
I will say that's the principle of subsidiarity, right? Which is things should be handled at the lowest possible level that they can be handled. Mm-hmm. My only response to that would be, if LA County has shown that they are not capable of auditing themselves properly, then I feel it would become in the interest of the state government to maybe micromanage, I guess you could say, not to the level that we see in other states like Michigan, where their governors, sad Carvel isn't here because he could speak to that, but Michigan, where the governor basically can kind of veto entire city governments and take control of their budgets.
That is in keeping with the principle, which is if you're unable to handle it, it goes to the next layer up. If that's what we need to do, then that's what we need to do.
So just to piggyback onto this conversation, I'll give a statement, Duane, and you tell me if you agree, disagree, or slightly, however. Okay. So American Solidarity Party, based in Christian democracy, Christian morals. If we start to, like you and Chris have discussed, if we start going into these programs and we start to find this waste, the fraud, and we start to cut back, would you agree that that is a plus to the ASP being rooted in this kind of Christian background, that hopefully under our leadership, we can bring the church back into a more prominent position of actually serving the community? I feel like, and this is my personal opinion, and it's, nothing against, I've had a lot of great pastors and a lot of great churches, but I feel the church, especially probably I would say the last 50 years, has really dropped the ball on what it was supposed to do for its communities.
That's an agree, and I should strongly agree with that. The only times I ever feel like that conversation would lead to anything that I would find maybe a little off balance is when it becomes a competition. So people may say, they shouldn't be doing that. The church should be doing that. And I often agree with that I would love to see the church, do this instead. But sometimes I feel like it can turn into whoever was taking care of this before, the church is saying, leave, we do it. And I tend to sort of be opposed that line of thinking just a little, just because I think that the church, as much as it should be the sort of, I guess, the center for looking out for the community and the people in the community, I don't want it to feel that it's in competition with anything else in that endeavor.
Something I would like to point out is I'm not advocating for like the church to become intertwined with government. It's more of a cultural influence, just the fact that the party expects better of the church, that the church would step up to do more.
That also ties into what we were talking about earlier with community, and the loss of that has multiple ramifications. And one of them is for how am I going to find housing? How am I going to find food? Sometimes in American history, where the obvious answer to that was the church that's a block away. And a lot of people don't feel like that's really an option for, what they can do or where they can go for help. Even if that church would be perfectly willing to help them in any way they need, there's just a psychological barrier because people don't see it as much as they used to. And so they don't even feel empowered to see the church as providing for them. And that's another huge problem.
To piggyback on that comment, Matt, and Duane, it sounded like, you kind of came to the ASP as, part of your own personal religious principles, which a lot of members have done that. A lot of members have come to the ASP because of their religious convictions. However, that has sort of led to a sort of reputation among opponents of the ASP who accuse us of, we're just one of those other Christian nationalist parties. How would you respond to those sorts of criticisms that might get thrown at you, that we're just a Christian nationalist group that's trying to push, a religious view onto people?
I think a lot of political organizations are sort of blind to how their own faith manages the principles of their party, even if that faith isn't what we would technically consider to be religious or what we would historically consider to be religious, there's still a certain set of values that guides them. Ours are based in the Christian principles, specifically Christian democracy, but it's not something we want to force onto people in the sense of your identity is going to change into that of a Christian because we're in power in this area. These are our principles, and we still believe in democracy. It's not sort of authoritarian by any means, but just like you're governed by your own principles that come from, maybe it's based in sort of secular means, ours are based in these, and we're going to not be afraid to stand up and support what we believe in just because of the origin of our principles. When that critique comes up, that's sometimes I think the best angle to approach it, only because being guided by principles that not everyone has individually accepted is not unique to a Christian worldview or a Christian-based party, but often it's kind of assumed that it is, unfortunately.
You can see that with various other groups can be aligned on our different principles. We're a very pro-life party, so is secular pro-life, whereas many of our members come to that view through their religious viewpoints. Some of them, we have atheist members in the party, very prominent members, in fact, and they still believe in that stance based on, secular reasons. There's no reason that just because we came to these principles via a certain way, that they're not also your principles that you share, and you shouldn't support them because of that.
I think it is very important for us as a party to make sure that people don't feel like they're signing up and making a statement of religious faith because they're joining the party. Like you said, people have come to these convictions through a lot of different roads, but we've all ended up in this place in however way we came here. And so I think that puts us on the same team politically. And I think that's a beautiful thing and one of the strengths of our party. And I think that because of our principles in the first place, I think we're able to navigate the differences between us in a better way than other parties that have more infighting.
Chris, you mentioned the environmental part of the platform. I think that's a good way to get back to earlier, Duane, at the beginning. You listed your three problems, main problems in California, and the first one was wildfires, which kind of follows under, I would say, the environmental portion of the platform. Do you have any kind of theory, any kind of idea of how that we could address this issue that is a recurring issue? I mean, and I understand it's just a geographical issue, but is there anything you think you can do to improve that situation?
Evidence-based stewardship when it comes to, I think, the best technique to approach this. Investment that protects people without treating workers as disposable. This would mean things like planning tied to the common good, land stewardship, things like that. And I think there should be, with environmental policies and opportunities, there can be a lot of talk and even a lot of action, but not everything results in an actual solution for the climate, depending on where you are. So one of the things that helps in evidence-based stewardship is a hard look at what works, what has been proven to work, and that's where we're going to spend most of our money. And that's why I wanted to tie it into budgeting, so that there can be a discussion of, hey, what is actually proven to work in the past? And if we're spending a lot of money on this, and even if we have really good intentions for, spending our money in this part of stewardship and this part of climate action, pollution action, a lot of times we're kind of losing the battle because we're just automatically inputting a lot of our resources into things that aren't working as well as they, ideally would be.
Recently, California just redistricted. Obviously, that was kind of supported by Gavin Newsom's administration, and it basically disenfranchised every non-Democrat in the state, honestly, out of the U.S. Congress through a very aggressive gerrymander. What is your opinion on that? Do you feel that those tactics are justified to be used? Would you, if that had come across your desk, would you have approved it or vetoed that redistricting?
I have been thinking about that because that was on the when I was thinking about whether or not to run for governor. That was one of the main topics of conversation in California at the time during the the 2025 elections. I am honestly on the fence. I have not come to a personal decision about how I feel about this sort of thing, and I feel like if I were to advocate for either side of that, I feel like I would be actually being dishonest because I actually haven't come to a personal conviction either way. And so I am tempted to sort of give my thoughts on one side, but I don't know. I feel like that would actually just be lying.
Do you, on principle, lean towards one way or the other on that, just without looking into all the details? Do you feel like gerrymandering in itself is a valid tactic for parties to use?
I feel like if we're talking about it just as a concept by itself, I am against it in sort of that on a moral stance. I would love it if that was something that just simply did not happen in the country. The reason I sometimes falter is because when one party does it so aggressively, it can turn into one party using this weapon just everywhere.
So you see it as kind of like a weapon in the arsenal a political party has to counter bad faith efforts. Like if the Republicans are going to gerrymander all the Democrats out of North Carolina, or Texas or wherever, we might as well, if we're the opposition to them, we might as well use that. Otherwise, we're at a disadvantage.
When in politics has anyone said, we're going to do this only because the other side were doing it, but we're going to stop when the reason we started is no longer valid. It very rarely does it turn into a responsible usage, which is why I'm hesitant to go all the way and support it in that case. But I do see the merit of, if this is just something that we're just going to sit back and allow to happen, are we really doing the right thing? So that's sort of my thinking on it. That's why I've been going back and forth in my head. But yeah,
it's a fair answer. I mean, it's like you're saying, and I know why you're confused on it because it can be used as a weapon, yes, but it also, as territories and demographics change, it is a viable tool to correct some things that have to come up. It's all about the intentions of how it's used. So I'm with you, Duane. I completely understand the confliction there.
Duane, now, obviously, Iran conflict just occurred. The party issued a statement recently condemning the war in Iran. Just real quick, do you agree with that statement? Do you think anything should be changed with that statement?
No, I agree. I do not believe that the interests of the American people are really well represented by this recent action. And I think I was awake when the announcement happened on Truth Social. I think I was awake for it. And I was appalled that I thought that the general consensus of the American people was blatantly ignored in this case. And so, no, I don't think I have anything in that to disagree with when it comes to that statement at all.
These sorts of conflicts tend to affect the states in a lot of different ways. Some states, it's sort of a boon because they have a strong military presence. I know California has a very strong military presence, especially in San Diego, where the naval base is. There's a lot of servicemen in California. Also, there's a lot of negative effects from it, higher gas prices. I know California already pays some of the highest gas prices in the country.
Yeah, we do.
And it's probably not gotten real good in the last week or so, right?
Correct.
There's also, the war is going to increase inflation because we're going to print more money to spend an extended conflict with Iran. These sorts of things affect the states, and as the governor, you would need to manage all of these different things going on. Where do we, as a party, stand with this, and how do we move forward with the reality of the situation?
From the perspective of California, because of our, like you just said, all the ways that this impacts California in ways that, well, obviously this impacts the entire country, but in ways that there are some ways in which this impacts California in ways it doesn't elsewhere. And because of the size of our economy, all the high prices we're already paying, the fact that we're on the coast, we have bases here. Sometimes California kind of absorbs costs of war, and that has a heavy impact on all of us. And sometimes that the people here don't feel like that's taken into account before somebody who, has no stake in the state personally decides something that's going to impact Californians in a unique way. So that's one, from the perspective of the state, that's one thing. I did not ever expect to think about wartime ASP. That's been I think a week-long thought process. However, I think that this is a very ideal time, I think, to emphasize what we mean when we call ourselves pro-life, because one of the things that I mentioned earlier about some of the stereotype of people and parties that consider themselves to be pro-life. And one of the things is you don't actually value the lives of people once they're outside the womb. And that's something we have to, we have to stand against and make sure that that doesn't describe us. And one of the ways to do that is to be, to say, hey, we have to be accountable for, you have to be accountable before Congress for whether or not you're even allowed to do what you're about to do. When it comes to, who we're going to strike, when we're going to strike. And, Trump likes to do things on his own. And if you're going to do these things, then the lives of us Americans are at stake. And, we deserve to have a say in this. The congressmen that, we put in power, they are the checks and balances that are supposed to, reel you in when you go and do these things. And now Iranian school children and American personnel are dead because of this. And so as a pro-life party, I think we have to be very clear about the fact that we are upset about this, that we do see this as an action that does not value these people as, from a religious context, image bearers, but even from a non-religious context, people who have inherent worth. So I think this anti-warman, the anti-wartime we use, I think that can come in handy. But yeah, this is to summarize everything, this is a very important time to diversify the meaning of pro-life. And there are fewer, I guess, relevant times, but fewer times as horrific as war for when this comes up. This is, I guess, I didn't think about this earlier when it came to, how does this come across to, an ASP platform. But it's almost point one, what is the value of a human life? So, yeah.
Duane, one thing I wanted to ask is, what do you feel like you bring to the table? What makes you a better candidate? What do you think you would do better?
Well, I think a significant percentage of California, and similar to the rest of the country, doesn't feel adequately represented by either party. And so a lot of people who, feel that they have been abandoned by, say, the Republican Party, maybe they are immigrants, or that they, for some other reason, they feel targeted and they lack the desire to sort of support a politically conservative party, because that often means Republican. Maybe they either voted for Gavin Newsom because they feel like that might be less of a problem with him, or maybe they decided to vote Republican because, that aligns with their socially conservative views. But other things that Gavin Newsom might offer that goes against what they personally believe. So I think for a state like California, which is often, labeled as a blue state, and for fairly good reason, I think that what the ASP has done is done a very good job at appealing to a demographic that makes up a significant portion of California, which is socially conservative people who don't really feel adequately represented by the Republican Party or feel like the Republican Party has their best interests at heart. And so I think what the ASP offers and what I offer as that candidate is an alternate option for those sorts of people. And I was looking at the One Life rally that happened in January of this year. And there's sort of a unfortunate stereotype that people have about pro-lifers, about we're just against marginalized people. We don't really care about their health. We're not really about, protecting life or something like that. And then you go to these rallies, I saw a lot of people who would be generally considered to be part of marginalized communities there. And these people, I spoke to a lot of them, and a lot of them felt like they were being targeted by the Republicans or by maybe more conservative outlooks on whether or not they have a right to be where they are. But here they were in support of something that is very anti-democratic party, which would be, the right of life for the unborn. And so I feel like these people really didn't have any candidate that really spoke to that part of them, or both parts of them at the same time. And I don't know, that opened my eyes a little bit and made me think about how the ASP is such a really good gift to those kinds of people.
Thank you guys for tuning in to the We Have Issues podcast. Again, that was Duane Loynes Jr., the American Solidarity Party candidate for governor of California. Thank you so much, Duane. We appreciate it. We're going to drop Duane's campaign info down in the description so you can go to his website, donate to his campaign, maybe even link a couple of videos so you can see other interviews and get into Duane's head a little bit more and learn a little bit more about him. With that, I'm Matt.
I'm Chris.
Thank you so much.